Hey, I'm Luke Jamay. It's good to see you again, and we're going to talk today about another fundamental move in card magic, the multiple shift. Now, the multiple shift is kind of an evolution on the single card control. A card control is one of the 5 things that I always cite as being the essential sleights needed to be able to do card magic well, along with the palm, the pass, the full shuffle, the false cut. So the multiple shift is kind of graduating up from that simple control of a card. The main difference between a multiple shift and a single card control is the fact that you are going to control more than one card, hence the reason that it's called a multiple shift. In this download today, we're going to deal with 2 of the classic shifts and a couple of variations on them that I really think are worth learning and will give you a good foundation with this, and then 2 original shifts that I've used for the last few years and have never been in print before or taught anywhere. So that's what we're going to do, and we're going to begin with the very classic one, the one that started it all off, for me at least, with multiple shifts. This is the Die Vernon shift, and the Vernon shift essentially is used to control a multiple number of cards. It can be any number. So for our example, we're just going to use 4 kings, which would be placed back into the deck. Now, why on earth a magician would take 4 kings out of the deck only to mix them back up again is a mystery that will only ever be explained by the magician. Nonetheless, the kings having been removed and the deck shuffled, you now have those 4 kings kept under your control. So this is the classic Die Vernon multiple shift, and you can control the cards either to the top of the deck by doing the shift with a face-up deck, or using exactly the same technique, you can control those 4 cards to the bottom of the deck using a face-down control, which would look like this. I happen to think that the face-up control looks more deceptive because of the constantly changing faces of the cards, but nonetheless, it's worth noting that the technique remains the same and you can control those multiple cards to either the top or the bottom, depending on where they're required in your trick. And the second multiple shift that we're going to deal with, a classic shift, is the Neil Ellis shift, which is, we take all 4 of the kings and place them back into the deck, and then we actually square those kings up pretty much anywhere in the deck, and then we give them a quick cut, and now each one of those kings have been controlled to the top of the deck. This is my preferred shift from the classic multiple shifts out there, and I do a dodge that I learnt from an Eric Mason book. Eric Mason was a brilliant English magician, and I tend to say this a lot, but it always seems that the English magicians come up with the best ideas. So let's deal with the Vernon multiple shift first. The Vernon shift is as follows. Whatever cards you happen to be controlling, we're using 4 kings for the sake of making the explanation easy, but of course these could be 4 selections for a multiple selection routine. They could be any 4 of a kind, or whatever it is that you're required to keep control of in your trick. And the Vernon shift could even be used up to an entire suit if you were going to do a diamond cut diamond style trick, showing that you can control multiple cards. So it's a very good shift for those kinds of things. So the method for this, to begin with, I make a fan and put the kings in, but there's no reason why you can't just insert them in the edge of the deck. So they're running along the deck. Now, if you're doing the control with a face down deck, I recommend putting the kings in the lower half of the deck, so toward the table. Now what's going to happen is, after those kings are up-jogged, and you leave them quite up-jogged, I mean they're only 1/3 of the way, or maybe just under half of the way in the deck there. You're going to grip the deck in a kind of elongated Erdonez grip there, by gripping the deck proper and the multiple shift cards, the cards that you're going to control, in the middle. So imagine you had a normal deck in your hand, it would be a mechanic's grip, you've just moved this extended deck kind of halfway down. Now what's going to happen is, you're going to wrap your first finger around these out-jogged cards as you allow the top portion here to slide down and cover those cards. So what's actually the situation you actually have right now is, only the top portion has moved, the 4 cards to be controlled are still out-jogged, and then you have the rest of the deck that's still in-jogged. So along with this, what's going to happen from the exposed view is, now these cards have been slid over, you're going to go into a Hindu shuffle, but you're going to go into a Hindu shuffle by gripping the out-jogged cards and the top packet between the middle finger and thumb, with the first finger squaring the front edge of the deck. So essentially what's happening is, you're actually stripping out those kings onto the face of the deck, and then you immediately follow that up with a kind of Hindu shuffle action. I tend to then go into another Hindu shuffle, which is a Hindu shuffle that retains the bottom stock of the deck, and this is done just by stripping out a block of cards from the middle and then going directly into a Hindu shuffle. So those kings never move, they always just stay on the face of the deck as you're doing this false Hindu shuffle, retaining the bottom stock of the deck there. So obviously, the same shift can be applied to a face-up deck, to control the 4 cards, or whichever cards you're controlling, to the top of the deck rather than the face. And to do this, place them in the lower half. Allow the cards to sort of slide down while you give a shake with your hand. Again, the kings are staying out jogged, the bottom half is staying in jogged. You're going to grip these kings between the middle finger and thumb, with the first finger as a kind of box grip here, as you strip them out into your hand. And then you're going to follow that up with a Hindu shuffle. And then as soon as the kings have been controlled to the bottom of the deck there, the top of the deck actually, you're going to continue with that fake Hindu shuffle, just stripping a block out from the center, leaving the kings in place. So I'm going to do this very slowly, so you should have an exposed angle of it, and we'll do it with the kings face up, so you can follow where they go. So each one of the kings goes into the deck. You now shake the hand, just allowing those cards to fall down. So right now the situation is the 4 kings rest in amongst the in-jogged portion of the deck. Above the last king, you have the cards that have been shaken and allowed to square up with this king. And this situation is gripped in the extended mechanics grip. You now pin down the deck proper, so you're only holding it with your left hand by gripping it with the fingers on the side, the thumb on the side, and the index finger on the top. You're now going to strip out those kings with the cards that were allowed to fall square with them, and then follow it up with a Hindu shuffle action, and then repeat a Hindu shuffle action, leaving the bottom stock in place. And that's the Vernon multiple shift. One thing I would say about it, I prefer doing it with a face-up deck, because if you watch the control one more time with a face-up deck, I think that the continually cycling faces in the shift gives a much bigger illusion and a much stronger illusion of the cards being mixed than when the cards are face down. I added the little section with just the Hindu shuffle at the end. It's probably commonplace, but that's just the way I've always done it. So the next shift is the Neil Ellis shift with the Eric Mason edition. Now, the classic Ellis shift was like this. You took the 4 kings and placed them into the deck. These are random positions. These could be cards replaced by your spectators in a multiple selection routine and such. You would now square those kings up on the edge of the deck, and what you've actually done as you've squared them up is kick them through onto the other side. Okay, so let's just deal with one card and how you pull those cards through, and then we'll apply it to multiple cards. We use a face-up king so it's easy to follow. You're going to take the king and you're going to push it in, but you're going to angle it slightly. You see it's angled, so the exposed corner ends locked between the 3rd finger and pinky, while the rest of the card is boxed in this fashion, in a box grip. So it's angled slightly, which allows you now, when you turn to face the spectator and show the card being squared up, to just push with the thumb, and what will happen is the minute that corner has vanished, you'll be left in this situation on the exposed edge. And now just with the pinky finger, you're going to take this final edge here and just pull it all the way home, which leaves it jogged to the side, jogged to the your right. Now in this position, you can do a couple of subtleties. You can riffle the deck in the hands, which gives a nice appearance of freedom. Andrew Wimshurst, the Australian magician, does a pressure fan over the jog, and when you square the jog up, that jog is still left in place. So there's a couple of nice subtleties that you can do with the cards in this jogged position. And essentially what's going to happen in the traditional Ellis shift, you're going to swing up the entire deck into the hand and then strip out the side jogged cards and place them on top. And this is the multiple shift, and with multiple cards it would look, even though obviously they wouldn't be face up, but this is just so you can follow them. You do exactly the same move, kicking the cards over as a block. Just view these as a single card and apply exactly the same technique. You push them through, now the pinky takes them all the way home and brings them out of the side of the deck. At this point you can do those subtleties we spoke about, and it won't affect the nature of the jogged kings, they will remain there. You now, in the traditional shift, continue pulling these cards home, probably this is the best angle, so and actually fully out the other end of the deck. You would now go into a swing cut, and you've now stripped out those 4 kings directly to the top of the deck again. So this is the traditional Neil Ellis multiple shift. I do a slightly different version, which is based on something from Eric Mason's in his book Stuff. That's the name of the book, published by Martin Breeze. It's a great book, has some really great material in it. And I sort of changed the handling very slightly, and I'm sure others have done this many times too. I place the 4 kings into the deck, And I place them kind of all bunched toward the lower end of the deck. Now, one good tip when you're doing this is not to make a full pressure fan or a full fan, but rather only fan the lower half of the deck, keeping a bigger block on the top. So when you come to put the kings in, it looks like they're distributed further in the deck than it would if you were to do a full fan, and then square the deck up. So now you see, even though it looked like they were distributed fairly well through the pack, they're actually all in the lower half. So that's one good small tip there. Now, again, the same thing happens. You're going to push them to the side, you're going to jog them in with the thumb, and then pull them out with the pinky finger, so they're side jogged. Again, at this point, you can go into any number of the subtleties that we spoke about. What I now do, rather than doing the traditional Ellis shift and kicking these all the way out with the pinky and going into a swing cut, my left hand comes beneath the deck and grips the side jogged cards in a straddle grip. And this is going to become important later on for the dribble multiple shift that I'm going to teach you. From this point, you riffle up into the lower half and stop before you reach the final king. You're now going to cut out, just stripping those kings out, and let them drop onto the packet in the hand, which you then complete the cut. It's got the same feel about it as a classic pass force cut, where you would use the classic pass as a force cut. It's got that exact feel to the control. So the kings go in, you take them, you align them, so now they're out the other end of the deck. You would grip them in a straddle grip like this. The back end of the deck you riffle up. You now literally strip this half out, leaving the kings in this position, allowing them to square with the hand tabled cards, and then complete the cut so the kings come back to the top of the deck. And I'll do that in full time for you once, and you should be able to follow along quite easily now you know what's happening. So the 4 kings get placed back into the deck. We square the deck up, we square the kings up, actually kicking them out the side. I give a short riffle, I then riffle up the back edge of the deck and give the cards a cut. And now those 4 kings are controlled to the top of the deck. So they're the 2 classic multiple shifts. And we're going to move on to some of my own multiple shifts right now, one of which I call the dribble shift and another one the fan shift. But the techniques that we taught in both the Vernon and the Ellis are going to be used in the next 2 shifts in a lesser and greater degree. So it's a good idea to really familiarise yourself with the methods we've already spoken about before progressing up to the next controls. And just a quick word of advice: when you're sitting there, if you just started watching this, make sure you have a deck of cards with you while you're doing it. Make sure you're following this along with the cards in hand, because a lot of these moves seem technical, but they're really not. They're more about just a feel and a knack and knowing where the cards are going to go, and sort of having a touch with the deck. So you should absolutely be following this with cards in hand to make your own learning quicker and easier. So let's move on to the first of my multiple shifts, which is the dribble shift. Now the dribble shift looks like this. You take each one of those cards and you place them back into the deck there. So you can see they go direct. I mean, I don't know how many cards are separating them, probably 10 or so in each king. And in that action we have controlled each one of the kings to the face of the deck. So this is based on another move which I really enjoy, the dribble pass, and that's taught elsewhere on the Penguin website as a download. I think it's a great, most invisible pass out there. This was one of my early experimentations when I was playing with the dribble pass. I also came up with a top card cover dribble pass and a dribble control and all sorts of things, and I'll show you 2 versions of this. Now the first version, for the multiple shift, you're going to use the same technique we've spoken about. You can notice that I do the fan and hold back a block by fanning it less on the top of the deck. This is now, again, graduating up in the level of subtlety with this particular idea. Rather than doing a thumb fan and keeping a block held back on the top, which looks obvious to the spectators, I tend to do a pressure fan and just keep the cards in a much tighter fan toward the end, so it still does look like the deck is fanned the entire way out. I now place each one of these kings into different positions in the deck, but of course, because we've used this fan subtlety, they're going in the lower portion of the deck rather than the higher portion. I'm now going to square them up, and as in the Neil Ellis shift, kick them out the side of the deck right there. So now they're resting in this position. Now, as with the Eric Mason version of the Neil Ellis shift, when you come over and grip the cards in the straddle grip, we're going to do the same thing as we riffle up the back end of the deck. That gives justification for this hand coming over and gripping the deck and staying in this kind of boxy grip. I now rotate the deck up on an edge. Now what's happening behind right here, it's very difficult to do an exposed view of this, I'm lifting the deck at an angle, but I'm keeping the kings in that straddle grip, so I can move the deck up and down while retaining this straddle grip with the kings. This is based on Derek Dingle's pass grip and his wedge break that he would use with the pass. So what's going to happen next is, after we've got to this point of rotating the deck like this, you're just going to angle those kings very slightly with the hand. So from the exposed view, you're just going to just going to angle them very slightly out the deck as you come up to show the edges of the deck to your spectator from this side. So let me just run through this entire sequence quickly at actual performance pace so you know how it appears. After the kings have been inserted, you use the LS shift to pull them out the back. You now rock the deck up to show the sides, and at that point we're now ready to go into the dribble. Now what's going to happen with this, all that's going to happen is the hands are going to move in opposite directions. One hand's going to pull these kings out, one hand's going to move up, and as soon as the kings come out, you're going to start dribbling the cards on top. So it's a very easy move, and it's kind of, again, a knacky thing. Like I was saying, you just sit there with the deck and it will work for you if you play along with the cards in hand. So from the exposed view, it looks like this. The cards are stripped out and then the cards are dribble on top. But from the good angle, the cards are placed back into the deck, the cards are squared, the cards are dribbled. So you can see that as soon as you strip those kings out, you should be in the point of dribbling the deck instantly on top of those kings to ensure that it doesn't look like you've just pulled a small block. So that's the dribble shift, and the other version of the dribble shift that I want to show you is for the control of a single card, which would be, let's imagine Mr. Cameraman is our spectator. If you don't mind, Greg, just call stop. Perfect, right here. What I want you to do is remember this card, the four of spades. In fact, I'll make it slightly easier for you by kind of kicking it up right there, so you can see. I mean, I don't know how many cards down would you say that was? Like 20 or so, maybe 25, something like that. And you can see it gets lost back in the deck there, and now it's on the bottom. So this is my dribble variation of the Marlowe convincing control. What happens is, you're going to ask the spectator to call stop. At that point, you do a double lift. I do a one-handed double lift, which I have been doing for a long while, and it's too difficult to explain in this, but we're going to teach it elsewhere. So if you like this double lift, feel free to explore it elsewhere on the site. If not, you can simply have somebody call stop, place this deck down and say, what I want you to do is remember this card, and then do any number of standard double lifts. A push-off double would always be my preferred double lift. So what happens after you've done the double, you turn it face down and up jog the card that apparently is their selection. Obviously it's not, because of the double lift it rests in the second position. From here, you square up, you bevel the cards to the right, and then you place this block on top of the beveled cards. What's happening beneath the deck, the fingers are locking on the actual selection, the card below the up-jogged card, and then as I square everything up, so it's locking on the actual selection, the card beneath the up-jogged cards, and then as I square up, what's happening is that card is being kept stationary while the rest of the deck is being squared, so that's now side jogged. So essentially you've now done the same thing that you would do with the Ellis shift with the pinky, but just doing it in a different manner. The deck is now displayed in this position, and I quite often bevel the top of the deck just to hide that any bad angle maybe coming through the palm. You're now going to push this card in like this, and show how far down do you think this is. So right now I'm gripping the deck in the exact same grip for the multiple shift, with the selection being gripped in the straddle palm. It just has this beveled spread of cards covering that. I now strip out the card as I square the deck and dribble it in the exact same fashion as the dribble shift, and the selection is controlled to the bottom of the deck. So that's a variation on the multiple dribble shift done with a single card, with a Marlowe convincing control style dummy card for them to follow throughout the control. And the next one is a shift that I call the fan shift, and it's developed specifically for tricks that involve spectators selecting 3 cards, and there are hundreds of 3-card routines out there in print. So we're just going to use the ace, the 2 and the 3 of clubs as our example, there we go, as our example selections, but obviously these could be the selections. Okay, so this shift, you're going to take each one of the selections, we're going to use the ace, the 2 and the 3 as our example selections, and place them directly back into the fan. You're now going to square the deck up, and then instantly follow that up with a quick in the hand shuffle. And in that action, you have actually controlled all 3 of the cards. Now this shift boasts one thing, and it was designed specifically with this in mind. The shift is over by the time the spectator is paying attention. Most multiple shifts happen during the shuffling. To me, this is the wrong time for the moment to happen, because this is when the heat is on the magician's hands. This is when he's apparently losing the cards. So if you can achieve the shift before the spectators have turned their full attention to you, that's the right moment to make the shift. So this is actually a shift that doesn't involve any like movement on the shuffle. The actual deception happens as you're replacing the cards into the fan. I'm going to use the face-up cards. You see, you put the ace in, you're now going to put the 2 in, but what happens is you clip the edge of the card along the fan, and then you allow the face, the back of this card to contact the back of the other card that is genuinely in the fan. And what actually happens is you place it directly next to that ace in the fan. But you do this in such a way that it's done on the up jog. So now it should look like that 2 is being placed somewhere in the deck, and then I separate it further on the way down. So now you have this wide separation here, and you can put the ace out like this too. You're now going to repeat the same action with the second card. So you can see that when it's done at full speed, it looks like you're just putting the card in the deck. It's got this fanned necktie action too, so it kind of looks like you can't really tell where that card is going. But the point is, even though this isn't a perfect move, the attention is not yet on these cards because you're just putting them in the fan. So what would happen right now if I was to square the deck up completely and then spread it, you would see that those 3 cards exist together in a block. So there's no need for me to shift these at any point because they're already together. So we cover this with the fan dodge. So we've fanned the deck out. We now take the 3 selections. It's contacted the face, and you can see I'm moving it with my pinky, so it's going further around underneath here. So now it's further. As I reach for this card, I'm pulling it further back. So now it looks like there's a wide separation, and then the final card goes in the middle. We now hit this card into the fan, hit this card into the fan. In actual fact, these cards are being squared beneath the original guide card. We now square the final card into the fan, and now you're going to close everything with your right hand in an anti-clockwise, no, in a clockwise close of the fan. So what happens right now is this block stays right here, but it's going to remain out jogged because this is essentially the pull-a-pull single card control, but it's covered from the top. So just give a flick of the wrist and you see we still have our jogged 3 right there. So what would happen now is I can push down on the jog and retain my break, and I could just go into a straight cut, and then I'd have all 3 cards on top. However, I choose, as I tend to with all my shifts, to mix the shift up with a shuffle. So the cards are squared. You can see that the cards are squared in the hands now. Everything is good. I give a flick of the wrists and you can see my jogged card right here. I now push down on my jog with the thumb break, so I have the thumb break right here, and I'm essentially going to chop everything below the break into the hand and then follow that up with an in the hands overhand shuffle. So now they're all on top. So this shift, I think, has a couple of really good elements about it that are missing from many other multiple shifts, and I really hope you give this one some attention and understand that the move is done all on the offbeat, all on the moment when they're not paying attention. That's when the cards are being put into the fan, and then you draw attention to when you square the cards up and shuffle them, and at that point you're doing minimal sleight of hand or being extremely fair, so it works out really well. I mentioned that I would talk to you about using it as a 4-card control, and let me show you why I don't recommend it as a 4-card control. It is possible, but the addition of the extra card makes the guiding of the cards into the spread much more difficult. So here's the first card, here's the second card, here's the third card, here's the fourth card. Now, it does work, and I've only got it that smoothly because I've done it for a long while and played with using 4 cards. But you'll see when you practice it that just that one more card can end up getting jammed because of the kind of odd configuration of these cards. These cards are essentially in a mini fan under the bigger fan. It can become much more difficult to control those cards. So when you do get proficient with the 4-card control, there's one more thing that you might find interesting. So let's use the 4 aces and a royal flush, and I'll explain why I'm going to use the royal flush in a while. Okay, so the 10, the jack, the queen, the king, we need the queen. Now, the nature of this shift means that you have to transfer a number of cards from the bottom of the deck to the top to complete the shift. So why not make those cards you're transferring something of use to you? So for example, if you place the bottom 4 cards of the deck as the royal flush minus the ace, and now fan the deck, you can now take each one, beginning with the suited ace for your flush, sight the 4th card in, 1, 2, 3, 4, and place your card above that royal flush. You can now take the next ace, and using the guide multiple shift as we spoke about, you can see it's much more difficult with 4 and looks more cramped, but it can still work. You can square everything into the deck, fan it up, get your break. At that point, you're going to chop off and shuffle at the break. So what's just happened now is after you've chopped off and shuffled to that point, you've controlled each one of the aces to the top of the deck, which is then immediately followed by the royal flush, which you move from the bottom of the deck to the top. I have no current use for that in a trick, but it's an interesting quality that can be exploited from the multiple shift, and maybe you'll be the person that turns that into an amazing trick, and next time you see me you'll blow my mind with it. So I hope you've been playing with your cards, and I hope that you've been following this along, and now it's time to get practicing on the multiple shifts, and I'll see you soon. Thanks for checking this out.